Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for part 2 of Harry Potter and the Magic of Mental Health. So for this lesson, we're going to be talking about self-care of magical creatures. And surprise, you're the magical creature. And we all can use self-care, especially in this time. And so that's why we're posting this video if you weren't able to meet with us live, so that you can get the information and take care of yourself. So first, my name is Jenna. I'm a counselor at the App State Counseling and Psychological Services. And so take your time as we go through this video. If you need to pause it, grab a pen and some paper. We'll be doing some exercises so you can keep along. But sit back, relax, and wizards, witches, muggles alike, welcome to join. So what will we be talking about today in terms of self-care of magical creatures? So if you were able to join us for that first lesson, we talked about values. So we're going to explore values in the current context of self-care. Then we'll discuss what self-care is and why it's important, and especially how we can practice self-care. And then we'll talk about self-compassion, which is very closely related, and then talking about boundaries and how to set appropriate boundaries so that we can take care of ourselves and so that we can be more compassionate. So first, I always like to start with the Harry Potter question of the day. So this is Harry Potter and the Magic of Mental Health. So thinking for yourself, where is your favorite place in the wizarding world? And I think if I had to answer that, I think I might say the Gryffindor common room. I think that would just be a really cool place to hear what's going on, hear about other people's lessons, hang out with Ron, Harry, and Hermione, but just see a different part of the castle and see kind of all its different areas. But thinking, what might your favorite place be? So let's get into it. So what are values? So a lot of times we ask people what values are, and kind of people have surprised, I've never thought about that. And so we can think of values as our heart's deepest desire for how we want to behave as a human. So these are very different from goals of what we want to achieve or what we want to get. Values are more about how we want to behave and how we want to act. And so you can kind of think of values as a sort of compass. And so if you've ever, gone camping or just looked at the compass on, if there's those compasses on your car, that it points north, it points south, it points west. Do we ever really arrive at north? Do we ever really arrive at south? No, but we're moving in that direction. And that compass lets us know we're moving north, we're moving to where we need to be. And we can kind of think of that similarly in terms of values. So if we think of how we want to behave, so for example, if I really value being authentic, then that's kind of where my compass is pointing. So that north would be, I want to act authentically. So that's maybe sharing with people how I feel or letting people know my opinion. And so I never maybe arrive at authenticity, but my actions, my behaviors, maybe those goals along the way move me in that direction of authenticity, of being genuine. And so we can also think of these values as because it can be hard to, if we've never really thought about it, to narrow or to understand what it is that's really important to us. And sometimes we can get into this trap of, well, my mom wants me to be this way, or society tells me I should be this. And maybe that those are important to us, but we want to take a pause and think, would that still be important to me if nobody was watching? If my parents didn't know I was doing this, if nobody else knew that I was being authentic, would that still be important to me? And so it can take a little bit of kind of searching, and values are not something that we necessarily, know right away or have to decide what they are right away, but giving ourselves that time to think about it. And so why does this even matter? Why are we talking about these values? So sometimes these expectations kind of can create pressure. So if we think, mom wants me to be a certain way, society wants me a certain way, friends, if those expectations really don't align with our true values, we can experience a lot of discomfort and we can experience a lot of distress. So sometimes maybe our expectations are not realistic or in line with our values. And so maybe I really value being alone, or maybe I have more of that introvertness where I value my alone time, I value my self-care time, but the expectation is that I'm out partying every weekend, or that I have a huge group of friends, we do things all the time. And when we don't have it, it feels weird, but really our values are, maybe I value more close-knit friends, I value having time to myself. It's not important to me to go out every weekend, but that's what the expectation is. And so seeing, do our expectations really match with what our values are? So by recognizing what those values are, we can better manage our expectations, and see what really is important to us. So how does this match with Harry Potter? So if you were at that first one, or the first session, we might have talked about what house we're in. And so this is in by no way completely exclusive or a completely inclusive list, but generally when we look at the different houses, some different values kind of pop up. And so taking it for yourself of, have you ever taken those like Pottermore quizzes, or what house are you? Thinking, what are those values that are important to me, or what house do I belong in? And so I know I said the Gryffindor common room is a cool place, but I am a Hufflepuff. That would be my house. So I'd want to see a different house's common room. But again, looking for yourself of seeing what house do I feel like I'm in? Do my values match my house? And if no, that's okay. We're just kind of looking around with this, but getting a sense of what is it that's important to me. And we'll take this, just kind of keeping it in mind and taking this towards self-care. So keeping what your house is and what those values are in mind, we'll come back to that in just a minute. But what is self-care? Man, we talk about self-care a lot and how important it is. And sometimes we forget to actually define it and really see, what does self-care look like for me? So self-care is essentially any activity that's deliberately done to take care of your emotional, mental, or physical health. And so self-care is going to look different for each person. What might be self-care to you maybe isn't necessarily self-care to me. And that's okay, because we're considering our own needs. We're considering what refuels us rather than depletes us. And oftentimes I hear, well, if I take care of myself, that means that's selfish. I'm not taking care of others. No, self-care is not selfish. It's really hard to take care of others if we're not taking care of ourselves as well. Kind of that idea of, it's hard to pour from an empty cup. And so when we're making sure that we're taking care of our needs, that we're taking care of ourselves, and we can refuel, if one of our values is taking care of others and being compassionate, likely we also need to take care of ourselves so that we can give to others and that we can be compassionate towards others. And so how do we do this? I like to think of self-care in kind of two categories. So we have like the macro self-care and the micro self-care. So macro self-care is kind of that overarching, those bigger things. So exercising, eating healthy, that typical like, oh, I'm going to go to the spa and have a spa day, or going hiking out on the beautiful Blue Ridge Parkway, or taking a vacations, things that maybe take up more time, take up more space, take up more resources. And those are all very important. It's important to have those macro self-care, to kind of have that day where you're just kind of doing you. And it's important to balance that with this idea of micro self-care. So what is it that I'm doing during the day to replenish? What am I doing moment to moment to take care of my needs, to take care of what's important? And so this can look as simple as, taking a deep breath, just taking a moment in the middle of a busy day to take time for yourself. Saying no, setting those boundaries that we'll talk about in just a little bit. Journaling, taking a stretch. I know right now a lot of you are probably spending a lot of time in front of the computer, and so I appreciate you taking the time to be in front of the computer now. And even while you're watching this, maybe stand up and stretch a little, get a little movement, get a little activity as you're watching this to take care of yourself if that's something that's important. And so remember what house you're in. So this was a really fun resource I found on blessingmanifesting.com. And so identifying different self-care for each house. And so we see kind of Ravenclaw, how self-care might look, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Slytherin. So for me as a Hufflepuff, I really enjoy helping others. I really enjoy being compassionate and making sure that I've flipped that compassion on myself as we're practicing putting myself first, taking a break, curl up with a baked good in a good book. So I think my good book would probably be the third Harry Potter. I think The Prisoner of Azkaban is probably my favorite. So looking for yourself of what were your values, what house would you say that you're in, and seeing if any of these self-care activities might work best for you, or thinking, as Hermione, as a Gryffindor, what we know about Hermione, she's very fastidious, she's very driven, she does a lot of work. So what self-care might be important for her? Thinking of how might she be able to take care of herself. And that's going to look really different than how maybe Luna might practice self-care, or even Malfoy. So we know him as kind of the villain in a way. And if you've read the books, you know that can kind of go back and forth, but even Slytherins need self-care, especially Slytherins, especially all of these characters need to find ways to take care of themselves. And so thinking, how do these look? How might they look different? How might they look similar? And how might this look for you? And so as we're taking care of ourselves, we're learning how to feel connected with our values and feel connected with ourselves. I want to take a minute to talk about this idea of self-compassion. And so again, sometimes we hear this idea that, well, self-compassion just means I'm being selfish, or I'm giving myself a break when I shouldn't. And that feels really tough, and that feels really hurtful towards ourselves. So self-compassion is essentially just being kind and understanding to yourself when confronted with personal failings. When you're struggling, recognizing that, man, I'm human, I'm having a tough time right now, and that's okay. And so self-compassion encompasses these three different ideas. So one, common humanity of, again, to be human, whether you're a witch, wizard, or muggle, you're going to struggle. And you're going to have some difficult times because you're human. And so understanding that common humanity of kind of we're all in this together. And this idea of self-kindness, of being kind to ourselves, giving us that same kindness we might give others, and then mindfulness of connecting us back to the present moment. Often when we're being really critical, we're maybe thinking of something we've done in the past or something we should do in the future, and we lose sight of the present moment. And so bringing in that mindfulness to bring us back in. And as I mentioned, kind of with self-kindness, that idea of treating ourselves as we would treat a friend. Often the things we say to ourselves are much more hurtful and much more damaging than what we might say to somebody else. And so we can kind of think of this as, the Dursley voice and the Hagrid voice. So we know Vernon Dursley, not a great dude, very critical, very harsh, very cruel. And so recognizing when maybe your mind or your voices get into some of that Dursley voice of really beating yourself up. I should have done this. I can't believe I did this. And then recognizing and kind of switching to giving that Hagrid voice a little bit more attention, and increasing the volume of that Hagrid voice of feeling very loving, kind, and supportive of, hey, I'm here for you. You've got this. And just becoming aware of when the Dursley voice is coming up, and giving that Hagrid voice, that inner Hagrid voice, a little bit more space and a little bit more volume. So this brings us to this idea of setting boundaries or dealing with Death Eaters. And so as we know, Death Eaters, Dementors, I know they're different, but kind of go with me on this. So Death Eaters are these mentors, people who don't respect personal boundaries, people who kind of take away energy or maybe feel like they're asking too much, or people who it's hard to say no to. And this could even be, friends that ask for a lot or family. This just because someone's a Death Eater doesn't mean they're a bad person, but it means they might take up a lot of energy. They drain a lot of your resources because maybe it's hard to say no. And so what are boundaries even? So boundaries is essentially what's okay and what's not okay. And so a lot of times when people think boundaries, they think this brick wall, nope, nothing can get in, like you can't even see me, I've got my boundary up. That's not necessarily what boundaries are. We can think of boundaries as kind of a roadmap to having a relationship. So it's less of a brick wall and maybe more of a chain link fence with like a pathway up to your house. It can sound like, hey, I really care about you, and I can't answer the phone at 3:00 in the morning, or, I really enjoy spending time with you, and I have to get my homework done right now. Can we hang out later? And so there's a lot of different types of boundaries. So we can talk about boundaries in terms of physical boundaries of actual like touch. Do I want to hug this person? Do I not? Emotional boundaries. How much do I want to share emotions? Material. Is this someone that I feel like I can lend a pencil to when they'll give it back to me? And sexual boundaries. And so you can set kind of different boundaries with different people. Maybe one of your friends, you really love to hug them, and another friend, you're like, nah, not so much. That's okay. It's going to look different for different people. And it's understanding for yourself, again, what is okay and what's not okay. And then clearly communicating that boundary with that person. And often people aren't necessarily used to having boundaries set or identifying when boundaries are being set. And so it's not always an easy conversation. And it's really important to be able to take care of ourselves, to set those boundaries, to recognize what you want that relationship to be like. And again, communicating your needs is incredibly important. So we've gone over a lot in a very short period of time. But kind of wrapping up, values can provide us with really important direction and understanding in how we want to be in life and how we want to act, and kind of guiding our behaviors in some of these different areas. So self-care, again, we've noticed it's very important for our overall well-being, and it can look like a number of different things. Self-care is very unique and individualized, and understanding what's going to refill us and replenish us from when we're feeling depleted. Self-compassion is a really important skill that allows us to be kind to ourselves so that we do have the space and we are able to take care of ourselves, and then setting those boundaries of recognizing what is okay and what isn't okay, and how it kind of ties into being able to take care of ourselves so maybe we can take care of others or take care of what needs to get done. And again, all of these are skills that can be learned, that can be practiced. And so I really encourage you to, take a look through these slides again, recognizing maybe where we want to improve our self-care, or we feel we're doing really well with self-compassion, and really seeing what's one thing that I can do differently this week, or that I can add in that hits on either understanding my values better, practicing more self-care, practicing more self-compassion, or recognizing what those boundaries are. And so I know this is a recording, so it's hard to ask questions, but if you'd like any handouts from today's lesson, so I have handouts on self-care, setting boundaries, what that all looks like, please feel free to email me and I can send you some of those handouts. If you'd like more assistance, or you're like, man, that self-compassion sounds like a really cool thing, I'd like to, get on that a bit. feel free to contact the counseling center. We're still able to provide services. And so we can help you get set up with a counselor if you think that would be helpful. And we can provide you with other resources if you're not wanting to start therapy or wanting something to kind of work on in the meantime. And then last plug, we have our final lesson, Defense Against the Dark Thoughts, where we'll go into a little bit more of mindfulness and managing some of those symptoms of depression and anxiety that I think can, again, be really helpful during this time. But I encourage you to either come visit us live to that or check out the recording, and we'd love to have you. So thank you so much for spending your valuable time here, learning some of these different skills. And I encourage you to kind of keep practicing, keep working on this. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.